Please, if you're happy to be on the record, there's a microphone going around.
My name's Stephen Wright and I'm responsible to Maisie and Kevin and the members of the Darebin Local Land Council in Western Sydney. Thank you, Hilary, very much for that wonderful piece of history that makes all of us who are old enough to remember how it used to be a little sad when the Crown was a little less worried about losing its own sovereignty to Aboriginal people. And thank you very much to Ray for his comments and thank you very much, Professor. A couple of anecdotes about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act. I acted in a matter in 1993 on behalf of an Aboriginal community on the north coast of New South Wales, and it was to protect an Aboriginal site which was a midden, which the archaeologists had agreed, which is sometimes unusual, was at least 11,000 years of continuous occupation. So it was by any standards a world significant site. It stood in the way of, and I always think of Muriel's wedding when I tell this story, it stood in the way of some North Coast developers and local government officials who desperately wanted to build a bridge. And the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act was invoked, and in the great spirit of Gough Whitlam, Robert Tickner was the minister, and he did not make an order, but what he did was he ordered mediation between the parties under those powers with the threat of an order to stop the bridge if mediation was not undertaken. The mediation was conducted as a co-mediation, that is, there was an Aboriginal and a non-Aboriginal person. The Aboriginal person was a lovely gentleman from South Australia called Bob Ware, who did a lot in that state for Aboriginal cultural protection over many years. And the non-Aboriginal person was the great Joan Domicile, who'd be known to a lot of people around this table. And that mediation was funded by the Commonwealth and went for 12 weeks. And at the end of that, there was a realignment of the fabled bridge to ensure the protection of the midden. And what made that happen was by the Commonwealth asserting that power and not being afraid of devolving that power to a state government who desperately wanted the bridge, and local government who were probably indistinguishable from the developers who wanted the bridge. It stood in the way of all of those, what was that word? What was the word we're using?
Subsidiarity.
Yeah, that word. Allowing state governments and local government to do their own thing is, I think, what I'd call it. By standing in the way of that, protection occurred. And it wasn't proper protection because you can still see the midden from the bridge, but the midden is still there. So I tell that story because that act worked and would work, but for the politics of the Crown not wanting to give up its own sovereignty. It's one of the worst examples of racism you'll ever find. The law is on the books. The orders get made and they're hollow because the substance of the orders don't do what they're supposed to do. I was then involved in the same style of matter with a place called Boobra Lagoon in northwestern New South Wales, which is said to be the easternmost resting place of the Gudea, the rainbow serpent, and a very important place across the nation. And again, orders were sought, and the orders were sought before the election in 1996, and no orders were made until after the election in 1996. So because our friend here's employer, the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, funded court proceedings, the federal court was used to demonstrate why there was such a high order of protection necessary that if the government didn't stop the activity, the court would make the order to do so. So again, the Crown was forced in that case to the judiciary, but the same result. So I think for me, one of the things that strikes me today, and this is why Hilary's work is so important, it shows you what the Crown can do when it's got the will to do so, and as Professor said, when there is some leadership in this area. Because otherwise what tends to happen is, like the situation we have in New South Wales today, where essentially the difference between the protection of colonial heritage as opposed to Aboriginal heritage is stark. And the example I will give of that, and thank you for indulging me, the Darebin Local Aboriginal Land Council owns the former Parramatta Jail and 5 hectares of land behind it. It's the most successful Aboriginal land claim in the history of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act. And an anecdote I will tell is that it's fabled that when Frank Walker was explaining to Neville Wran what the Land Rights Act was all about, Wran was heard to say, "All right, Frank, give them the land, but don't under any circumstances give them expletive control over their cultural sites." And that's why we're all here. That business is not finished. Because had the New South Wales government give both land rights and control over cultural sites, that would have amounted to diminished sovereignty. And they couldn't do it, and they didn't do it, and they didn't do it consciously. So now we have a situation where the sandstone of the Parramatta Jail, the Darebin Local Land Council as the freehold owner can't touch because it's extremely high value national or internationally significant heritage. But Dr. Comber, sorry, but you know this is not aimed at you personally.
I know.
Excavated the site just south of the jail at the Cumberland Hospital, which is owned by the New South Wales property developer Urban Growth, and was fabled to be, on the maps I saw some time ago, the next Singapore. It won't be that now. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased. I apologise in advance. Thank you for indulging me.
No, thanks for that. It was really valuable.
One very quick intervention, and this is also addressed in the State of Environment 2016 report, the Heritage chapter, that when you look around the 9 jurisdictions, the Commonwealth, the states and territories, all of the legislation that purports to be protecting Aboriginal cultural heritage is actually framed as a step-by-step set of instructions on how to get permission to destroy it. That's the way the legislation is actually constructed. So the tail wags the dog, you know. And as we move into processes for statutory change, and as you all know, one well underway in New South Wales, the really important thing is that switch, is to switch the emphasis not only away from who makes the decisions in relation to whose heritage it is, but also what the objective is, which is to conserve rather than destroy.
Yes.
It goes to the heart of what we've been talking about here today. When we're talking about the word Guri and Korean, we're not talking about Indigenous people. We are talking about human beings. Yes, they're our people, but they're human beings, and the occupation is what we're talking about. We're talking about this continued occupation before contact. So how do you switch one off one for the other? This is the challenge. But I think the fact that we've come here today in goodwill to have a conversation is an important thing. Where to from here is the most important thing. Somebody's got to create the fire and somebody's got to collect the wood. All right? That's as simple as it is. And if we don't do it, we continue to see a country diminished. We all do. We continue to see a country diminished, and it's not just about Guri people. It's about this. It's about we as a people. We have not. We have. What is it? What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? You know, this is the great challenge. What are we afraid of as a people? So we're going to look into our history, and it is as bad as it is. We know what it is. How do we get ourselves out of it? Only with growing up, only with maturity, only with working together, only with a sound commitment to change will that ever happen. And I'm in for the fight.
Good. Happy to have you.
Thank you, Ray.
Happy to have you.